Nobody ever wrote a survival manual for the girl who fed the wrong creature behind a gas station on a Tuesday. Nobody warned her that kindness, in this universe, is a contract. That when something old enough to remember the first stars looks at you, really looks at you, the way light looks at a prism, and decides you're worth something, the cosmos does not ask your permission before rearranging your life around that decision. Mara Voss was 26, broke in the specific way that is both financial and spiritual, eating a gas station sandwich over a dumpster behind the Quick Mart on Fletcher Avenue when she saw it. Not a dog, not a lizard, not anything that belonged in a city that smelled like exhaust and old rain. A dragon. Small, maybe the size of a beagle. Scales the color of something between smoke and a bruise, one wing bent at the kind of angle that meant pain, crouched behind a recycling bin like it was hoping the universe would forget it existed. She knew that posture. She had used it herself in a different city in a different life before she packed 2 bags and drove until the gas ran out. So she gave it half her sandwich. Turkey. Mustard. The good mustard, the spicy brown kind she had specifically chosen because it was the one small luxury she allowed herself on payday. The dragon ate it in one bite, looked at her with eyes like collapsed stars, and then it was gone. Mara went home, washed her hands, went to sleep, and at 3:17 in the morning, the air in the center of her apartment tore open like wet paper, and something enormous stepped through. This is the story of what came next. It is not a love story, though love is in it. It is not a war story, though war arrives uninvited, the way it always does. It is a story about what the universe does when a human being, exhausted and broke, and eating a bad sandwich behind a gas station, chooses softness anyway. It turns out the universe has been watching for exactly that. It turns out it has been waiting a very long time. The sandwich cost $4.19, and Mara Voss had debated buying it for longer than she would ever admit to another human being. She stood at the Quick Mart refrigerator section for almost 4 minutes, which is an embarrassingly long time to stand anywhere holding a triangle of plastic-wrapped bread, doing the math in her head the way she always did, the way she'd been doing since she was 19, and her mother stopped answering the phone, and the numbers in her bank account started looking like a different language. Turkey or tuna? $4.19 or $3.79. The 40-cent difference was not enormous. The 40-cent difference was also, depending on how the rest of the week went, the difference between laundry and no laundry. She bought the turkey, the good mustard. It was payday. She was allowed one thing. Fletcher Avenue at noon on a Thursday looked the same as it always did, which was to say it looked like a street that had given up on ambition sometime in the early 90s and made peace with the decision. Auto repair shops. A nail salon with a neon sign that blinked in a rhythm that suggested it was trying to communicate something. A Quick Mart that smelled like burnt coffee and synthetic pine, the same smell every Quick Mart on Earth shares, as if they're all connected to a central scent reservoir somewhere underground. Mara ate her lunches behind the Quick Mart because there was a concrete ledge back there that was exactly the right height for sitting, and because the dumpster counterintuitively did not smell as bad as the dumpster outside her own building, and because back here no one could see her eating a gas station sandwich alone at noon on a Thursday, which mattered to her more than she could explain without sounding sad about it. She was not sad. She was practical. The recycling bin was the blue one, the large industrial kind, pushed against the back wall of the building next to a pile of flattened cardboard. She had walked past that bin 6 times a week for 8 months without once looking at it with any attention. She looked at it now. The sound was wrong. Not a rat sound. Not a pigeon sound, which she knew well, the fat specific cooing of the pigeons that treated the back of the Quick Mart like a timeshare. This was lower. A vibration more than a sound. Actually, something she felt in her back teeth before she heard it with her ears, and it made the hair on her forearms stand up in a way that felt less like fear and more like recognition, which was stranger. She stopped chewing. She looked at the gap between the bin and the wall. 2 eyes looked back. Not rat eyes. Not pigeon eyes. Not any animal eyes she had a category for. They were the color of something between silver and deep water, the kind of color that does not exist in a simple way, and they were set in a face that her brain processed in pieces because processing it all at once seemed like a task her neurons were not equipped to handle on a Thursday at noon. Scales. Definitely scales. The dark, iridescent kind. Not shiny exactly, more like the surface of a soap bubble that had decided to be permanent, shifting color depending on the light, going from smoke gray to deep violet to something briefly, startlingly gold before settling back to gray smoke. A snout. Small proportionally, the size of a large dog, she thought, except that the shape was wrong for a dog, and wrong for anything she could name. The neck was long, the body tucked tight against the wall in the way of something that was used to making itself small, and it had wings folded against its back, and one of those wings was bent. The wrong way. She knew the wrong way. She had driven with a friend once who broke their arm in a car accident, and the arm had bent, and she had known viscerally before the sound even registered that something had gone wrong with the geometry of a human body. This wing had that same quality. It was held at an angle that belonged in a different conversation than the one the rest of the body was having. The creature looked at her. She looked at the creature. She was holding half a turkey sandwich. Later she would think about what she did next and try to find a logic in it, and she would not find any which would eventually stop bothering her. There was no logic. There was only the fact that she recognized something in the way the animal held itself, the tight, pressed-in quality of it, the making itself small quality, the eyes that were watching her with a very specific expression that she did not have a word for in English, but that she had seen in the mirror at 22 when she was in the city she did not talk about anymore. In the apartment she had left in the middle of the night with 2 bags and $40 in cash, and that recognition moved her hand before her brain had filed the paperwork. She held out the half sandwich. The good half. The half with more mustard. The creature's nostrils flared. The silver eyes moved from her face to the sandwich and back to her face. This happened 3 times, which she found she was counting without meaning to. Then it took the sandwich. Not snatched. Not lunged. It extended its neck. And the neck was very long, longer than she had initially appreciated, and took the food from her hand with a precision that was almost formal. Delicate. The kind of care that suggested it was choosing to be gentle, which was different from the kind of care that comes from not knowing how to be otherwise. It ate the sandwich in one motion. One smooth, complete motion, the way water falls. Then it looked at her again. She sat down on the concrete ledge. She ate the rest of her lunch. She did not make sudden movements. She did not talk to it, which felt right. She simply existed in the same space, eating, and the creature watched her with those collapsed star eyes, and after a while the tight press quality in its body loosened very slightly. Not much, just the difference between stone and almost stone, and that felt like something. She finished eating. She collected her wrapper and her napkin with the neatness of someone who grew up in a house where messes were dangerous. She stood up. The creature made the sound again. The teeth vibration sound. She looked at it. The wing. The bent wing was trembling slightly, and looking at it more carefully. Now that she was looking carefully, now that her brain had moved past the stage of trying to categorize what she was seeing and into the stage of actually seeing it, she could tell the bend was not a break exactly. More a dislocation. The joint was wrong, not shattered. Wrong in the way a shoulder is wrong when it has come out of its socket, which she also knew from personal experience, from a fall in a fire escape she did not think about. She had a first aid kit in her car from the time she hit a pothole, and her tire iron rolled under the seat, and she had the kit because she was the kind of person who kept first aid kits in her car, even though she could not afford dental insurance. She did not think about it very hard. She went and got it, setting a dislocated wing joint on an animal she could not identify using instructions she was making up in real time was an experience she would describe later as profoundly stupid and also completely correct. The creature held very still while she worked, which was either trust or resignation. And she chose to believe it was trust because the alternative made her feel like a kidnapper. The joint went back with a sound she felt in her back teeth again. Different sound this time, a sound like something completing a sentence that had started, and the creature made a noise she did not have a word for, low and resonant, something between a purr and a chord. It stretched the wing. Both wings, actually, slow and careful, testing the way a person stretches an injured shoulder the morning after, cautious with hope. It looked at her. Then it was gone. Not running. Gone, the way a specific light in a room is gone when a cloud moves. One moment there. Next moment, the space is simply without it, and you have to look twice to confirm you are not misremembering the shape of empty air. Mara stood behind the Quick Mart with an open first aid kit and a wrapper from a turkey sandwich and the feeling of scales still faintly printed on her palm. She went back to work. She filed the invoices that needed filing. She had a conversation about the copier being jammed with a coworker named Tim, who she found mildly exhausting on the best of days. She drove home on Fletcher Avenue in the particular traffic that Fletcher Avenue produced at 6 in the evening, the crawl of it, the particular dull aggression of cars inching through a light that only let 4 vehicles through at a time. She made pasta, the cheap kind. She watched 40 minutes of a nature documentary about migratory birds, and then fell asleep on the couch with the television still on. She dreamed about scales and silver water. At 3:17 in the morning, the air in the center of her apartment tore open like wet paper. She woke because the sound was not a sound exactly. It was the absence of sound, actually a sudden pressure drop in the apartment, the way a room feels before a thunderstorm when the air pressure changes and your ears adjust, and there's that brief, strange quiet. And then the tear happened, and sound flooded back, and all at once, a deep, sustained tone, the kind of sound a very large bell makes if you were standing inside the bell. The television was still on. The nature documentary had moved on to something about Arctic fish. The tear was in the middle of her living room, approximately 4 feet from the coffee table, where a pasta bowl from dinner still sat with a fork in it. She would try to describe this later, and always fail. It was like watching light behave wrong. Like watching a vertical line of air decide it no longer wanted to be air and become instead a doorway, edges burning cold, and white, the inside of it not dark, but too bright, the kind of bright that her eyes slid off of, that her vision refused to process directly the way eyes refuse to look at an eclipse. Something stepped through. Not the small creature from behind the Quick Mart. That creature would have fit on her couch. This was not that. This was large. Large the way buildings are large. Large in a way that involved restructuring her understanding of the word. Large in a way that should not have been possible in a 700-square-foot apartment, and yet was happening anyway, because reality had apparently decided to be flexible about square footage. It moved through the portal in a way that compressed the geometry of the room without breaking it. She would later decide that what she was witnessing was a being that existed at a scale larger than the space it was currently choosing to occupy, and was doing something equivalent to folding itself to fit, the way a very tall person sits in a small car. It settled in the space between her kitchen and her living room. It looked at her. Its eyes were not silver. They were gold. Old gold, not the bright kind, the dark antique kind, the kind that has been somewhere time works differently and carries the residue of that. It was a dragon. Unmistakably. Undeniably. The large kind that every human culture had independently decided to include in its mythology, which now suddenly seemed less like coincidence and more like cultural memory. Mara sat up on her couch. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt from a 5K she had not actually run and flannel pants with small cats on them. She looked at the dragon. The dragon looked at her. It had a collar. She noticed this now in the way you notice small details when your brain is rationing its processing power. A collar of something that might have been metal or might have been condensed light, and hanging from it unmistakably the shape of a half circle of bread. Fossilized or crystallized or something she did not have a word for. Preserved. Her sandwich. Her $4.19 turkey sandwich, worn around the neck of something that had probably been alive when the Earth was figuring out continents. The dragon opened its mouth. She braced. It did not breathe fire. It spoke. In English. In a voice that sounded like several large instruments playing the same note in a room with very good acoustics. The small one is my youngest, it said. She has been missing for 3 of your years. We cannot find her. You found her, healed her, and fed her your own food. In the old compact, this creates a debt. Mara opened her mouth. Closed it. I have come, the dragon said, to pay it. The Arctic fish documentary continued quietly in the background. A narrator was explaining something about ice pressure. Okay, Mara said. It was not the most eloquent thing she had ever said. It was also, she felt, appropriate to the moment. The dragon looked around her apartment. At the pasta bowl. At the nature documentary. At the first aid kit she had left on the kitchen counter and not put back in her car yet. You are a healer, it said. I work in accounts receivable, Mara said. The dragon considered this. It had the expression, and she was aware that attributing expressions to a dragon was a choice, and also that she was doing it anyway, of something translating a concept from one language into several others, and back again before responding. For now, it said. The portal behind it was still open. The cold, white light of it was doing something to the shadows in the apartment, shifting them in directions shadows did not usually go, and through the opening she could see something, not darkness, not light exactly, something in between, something that had depth the way the ocean has depth, something that suggested scale in the way that looking at a mountain from a distance suggests scale. The knowing that what you are seeing is much larger than the frame your eyes are currently giving you. Something moved in that depth. Several somethings. They were looking at her. "My debt is this," the dragon said, and its voice dropped half a register, which made the pasta bowl on the coffee table vibrate almost imperceptibly. "Protection, knowledge, passage. You will need all three before this is finished, and I will give them, and when you have used the last of them, the debt is settled, and you are free to refuse anything further." "Before what is finished," Mara said. It was not quite a question. She could tell already, from the way the somethings in the portal were watching, from the cold white light that was rearranging her shadows, from the fact that she was sitting on her couch at 3:17 in the morning having this conversation at all, that the answer was going to be large. That the answer was going to require a different version of her than the one who had stood at a refrigerator for 4 minutes debating 40 cents. The dragon looked at her with gold antique eyes that had been open since before her planet had water. "The war," it said simply, "that is coming to your world." The Arctic Fish documentary finished its segment. A commercial began. Something cheerful about car insurance. Mara reached over and turned the television off. "Tell me," she said. Outside, on Fletcher Avenue, a streetlight flickered. The Quick Mart sign was dark, the way it always was after midnight. A city that had given up on ambition in the early 90s and made peace with the decision continued doing exactly that, unaware that in a 700-square-foot apartment above it, the shape of everything was changing. Mara Voss pulled her knees to her chest on the couch and listened to a dragon explain the war. She was wearing flannel pants with small cats on them. She took notes on the back of an envelope. Later, much later, in a different part of the universe, in a place where the word apartment would have required serious translation, she would look back at this moment and understand that this was the first decision. Not the sandwich, not the wing, the notes on the envelope, the reaching for a pen, the choosing at 3:17 in the morning with her whole life about to come apart at the seams, to understand rather than to run. That was the first decision. There would be many others. The portal stayed open. The things in the deep watched. The dragon spoke, and Mara listened, and the night moved around them like water moving around a stone, and by the time the first gray light of morning touched the windows of Fletcher Avenue, she had 6 pages of notes, a cold pasta bowl she had forgotten entirely, and the quiet settled certainty that she was not going back to accounts receivable on Monday. She was not going back to a lot of things. The dragon's name, she learned somewhere around page 4 of notes, was Vale. The small one, the one with the bent wing, the one she had given the good mustard half of her sandwich to, was named Issa, and she was 240 years old, which made her, in dragon reckoning, approximately a teenager. She had been lost in transit during a crossing that went wrong, ended up stranded in a city on a planet her kind called the Quiet World, which humans called Earth, and had been surviving on whatever she could find, which was not much, and had been in pain from the wing for 11 of Mara's months. 11 months. The creature had been in pain for 11 months, making itself small behind recycling bins, and Mara had walked past that bin 6 times a week, and never looked at it until she sat down in exactly the right spot at exactly the right moment with exactly the right sandwich. The universe, Vale explained, did not believe in coincidence. Mara was not sure she believed in the universe. She was beginning to revise this position. The war was older than the solar system. It was not a war about territory or resources, not exactly. Those were symptoms, Vale said, not causes. The cause was simpler and older and harder to argue with, which was that there were things in the universe that believed other things had no right to exist, and they had been acting on this belief in organized and escalating ways for longer than Mara's entire species had been walking upright. The dragons had been part of the coalition against it for a long time. Many other species had been part of it. Humans had not been part of it, because humans had been on the Quiet World, which had protections, which had kept it quiet. The protections were failing. 3 had broken already. A 4th was cracking. When the 4th broke, and Vale said when not if in a way that sat in Mara's chest like a swallowed stone, the Quiet World would not be quiet anymore. Things would come through that had no interest in making themselves small behind recycling bins. Things that did not want feeding. Why me? Mara said. It was page 6 by this point. She had run out of space on the envelope and was using the back of her electric bill. Vale was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of not knowing. The quiet of deciding how much of the truth to give her. Because Issa chose you, it said finally. And Issa's choices have always been accurate. She is young, and she is sometimes reckless, and she ended up stranded on your world because she is both of those things. But her instincts about people have never been wrong. Mara thought about this. She's 240, she said, and she's bad at navigating, but good at reading people. Yes. So she's basically a 20-year-old. Vale's expression did something complicated. We do not use that comparison. But, yes. Mara looked at her notes. 6 pages. Protection, knowledge, passage. A war older than the solar system. A teenager dragon with good instincts. For failing protections. She thought about the 40 cents she had debated at the refrigerator. She thought about the specific quality of the creature's eyes when she held out the sandwich. The watching and the waiting and the not quite hoping, because hoping had gotten painful and it was easier to stop. She had known that quality. She had worn it herself. She was done debating. Okay, she said. Tell me what the first step is. Vale looked at her with gold antique eyes. For the first time since it had stepped through the portal, something in its enormous face did something that was not quite an expression she had a word for in English, but that she understood anyway. The way you understand a word in a language you have not studied, but spoken by a face that means it. It was relief. Very old, very tired relief, the kind that has been held a long time. Sleep first, it said. You will need it. The first step begins at sunrise, and it begins in your kitchen, and it is going to require you to be awake for it. What happens in my kitchen at sunrise? Issa arrives, Vale said. She has questions for you. She has had them for 3 of your years, and she will not stop until they are answered. And she asks the way young ones do, which is without pause and without order. Mara looked toward the window. The gray of almost dawn. Is she going to eat my food again? Almost certainly. Mara got up. She went to the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator and looked at what she had. She had eggs, half a block of cheese, leftover pasta, an apple that was 2 days from needing to be thrown away, and 3 slices of bread. She took out the eggs. She was going to need to go grocery shopping. She was also apparently going to need to help defend a planet. She scrambled the eggs. Behind her, the portal made a sound like a held breath releasing, and when she turned, the portal was gone, and Vale was gone, and her living room was just her living room again. The couch and the coffee table and the dark television and the shadows where they were supposed to be, except that hanging in the air in the center of the room, where the portal had been, was a single scale. Iridescent. Smoke gray going to violet going to briefly, startlingly gold. She left it there. She ate her eggs. She went to sleep for 2 hours on the couch because the bedroom felt far away. She set an alarm on her phone for 6:45. She slept without dreaming, which was new. The alarm went off, and something very small landed on her fire escape with a sound like a dropped coin and pressed its face against the window glass with its eyes wide and silver and its wings both perfectly even, and Mara Voss looked at it and thought very clearly, I'm going to need more good mustard. Issa asked 47 questions before Mara had finished making coffee. Not 47 approximately. 47 exactly, because Mara counted, because counting was the thing her brain defaulted to when it was overwhelmed, a habit from childhood, and from the particular kind of math she had done in her head at refrigerators and gas stations, numbers as anchor, numbers as the thing that stayed still when everything else moved. The questions range from the deeply philosophical, why do your buildings not move? Do you not find it strange to live inside something that cannot choose? To the aggressively practical, what is this liquid, and why is it the color it is, and why do you drink it while making a face like that? To the ones that landed somewhere in her chest, and sat there, the food you gave me. You had more somewhere safe. No, Mara said. That was it. Issa looked at her. The silver eyes held the question without asking it again. They did not need to. I know, Mara said. Issa was larger in the apartment than she had been behind the recycling bin, though she was trying visibly not to be. She folded herself with that same careful deliberateness, the choosing to be smaller quality, except now it did not have the compressed, desperate quality it had had before. It was just consideration, taking up only what space was offered. She had, Mara noticed, a very expressive face for an animal, for a creature, for a 240-year-old dragon who could presumably level this building without much effort if she chose to. She had a face that went through 7 distinct expressions in the time it took Mara to pour coffee into a mug, and all 7 were readable, which was more than Mara could say for most humans she knew. The 48th question, when it came, was quieter than the others. "You're not afraid of me," Isis said. It was not quite a question, but it wanted to be. Mara considered lying, considered the diplomatic middle ground, decided against both. "I'm afraid of the war your father told me about," she said. "I'm afraid of the things that will come through when the 4th protection breaks. I'm afraid of how I'm going to explain this to my landlord if something large comes through a portal in my living room and damages the flooring. I'm not particularly afraid of you." Issa looked at the floor. The floor was laminate wood grain, the cheap kind. The other humans were. "The ones who found you before." A pause. Very brief. "Yes." Mara drank her coffee. She did not pursue it. She had been dropped into conversations before where the thing that mattered most was the thing not being said, and she had learned, slowly, with effort, that silence held better than questions. You just had to be willing to wait inside it. "They threw things," Isis said. The sentence was very short. Mara drank her coffee. "I am sorry that happened," she said. That was all she said. She did not explain that people were afraid of things they didn't understand, did not offer context or framework or the comfort of a broader perspective. She just said sorry and let it sit and drank her coffee, and Issa looked at her with silver eyes that were 240 years old and had apparently not been told sorry about this before. They sat in the kitchen. The morning light came through the window on a diagonal. "My father said you agreed," Issa said. "He said you were going to ask me questions. He didn't specify that there would be 47 of them before 9 in the morning. 48, including the fear one." "Yes." Mara set down her mug. "What I need to know first." Issa sat up straighter. And this was a different posture from the folded, careful one. This was the posture of something that had information it had been holding for a long time and had been waiting for exactly the correct moment to set down. Her wings settled against her back, both even now, both moving freely, and she was not trying to be small anymore. "The protections," she said, "they are not magic the way your stories think. They are agreements." Mara picked up her pen. She had the electric bill still. She turned it over. "Go on." "The protections of the quiet world. Earth, Mara's planet, the one with the single moon, and the atmosphere, and the embarrassing amount of species diversity, and the one sentient species that had spent most of its existence arguing with itself, were not physical structures. They were not walls or shields or anything that could be photographed or measured. They were agreements made between very old things, the kind of old that was not a number, the kind of old that was a state of being, and the agreement said, this world is not ready. Leave it until it is. 3 agreements had broken because the things that had made them on one side were gone, dead, or changed into something that could not hold to agreements, or simply absent in ways that could not be fully explained, even the language Issa was using, which Mara was processing through a translation that Vale had apparently installed somewhere behind her left ear at 3 a.m. without explaining how or asking permission, which she had a number of feelings about that she was filing for later. The 4th agreement was held by something that was not gone but was failing. A being Issa called the Threshold Keeper, which was not a name exactly, but a function the way accountant is not a name, but a function, and the Threshold Keeper was old in the way only a very few things were old in the way that made Vale seem young, and it was failing because something had reached it and was pulling at it the way you pull at a thread, and everything connected to the thread begins to loosen. What's pulling at it? Mara said. Issa looked at her steadily. A being called the Hollow. That's a name. It is what it has become. It was something else before it chose what it is. Things that choose emptiness, Issa said, become the names for what they chose. Mara wrote that down. She was not sure why. It seemed important in a way that was bigger than the immediate context. She put a star next to it. The Hollow was coming for the Threshold Keeper. When it reached it, and Vale had said when not if, the 4th agreement would break and the quiet world would not be quiet. The protections that had kept Earth insulated from the larger war would be gone, and the things that had been watching the edge of those protections, waiting with a patience that was not kindness but calculation, would come through. They were not coming for resources. Mara had asked this, and Issa had confirmed it. They were coming because the quiet world existed, and they believed that things that existed without acknowledging the hierarchy that the hollow represented were a statement against that hierarchy, and they did not accept statements. So they want to destroy it because it's here, Mara said. Because it is here and not theirs, Isis said. Yes, that's insane. It is also, Isis said, the oldest reason for destruction there is. Mara put down her pen. She looked at the ceiling of her apartment, the cheap textured ceiling with a water stain in the corner for where the upstairs neighbor had overflowed a bathtub 3 years ago. What can one person do, she said. She was not asking it the way people ask it when they want to be talked out of the asking. She was asking it as a genuine engineering question. What is the constraint? What is the variable? What can actually be moved from this position with these resources at this moment? Issa tilted her head. Her neck was very long, and the tilt brought her eyes level with Mara's face. My father said, protection, knowledge, passage. Knowledge first, Mara said. That's what we're doing now. Yes. Passage second. You're going to take me somewhere. Yes. And protection third. She paused. Who's protecting whom? Issa was quiet for a moment. Both, she said finally. They went out. This sounds simpler than it was. Going out in this context meant Issa reducing herself to a size that would not cause a Fletcher Avenue incident, which she managed with a concentration that was visible, her scales losing some of their iridescence while she did it, going flat and dark the way a display screen goes dark when processing something. And it meant Mara walking down the stairs of her building with a dragon the size of a large cat across her shoulders, which was the arrangement they settled on, because the alternatives were all worse. Issa was heavy. Not dog heavy. Heavier than her size suggested. The way old wood is heavier than you expect. The weight of density rather than volume. You have lived here a long time, Issa said as they came out on a Fletcher Avenue. 8 months. Before this. Different city. Issa waited. I left in a hurry, Mara said. I'm not going back. Issa accepted this the way she had been accepting things all morning, completely without asking for more, the information taken and filed without comment. Mara was beginning to understand that this was not in curiosity. It was the opposite. It was the recognition that some things were not hers to pursue, and the choosing to honor that boundary, which was a social skill that Mara had spent years trying to teach to various humans she had known with mixed results. 240 years old, she said, and you're the one who got lost. I took a shortcut, Issa said. Did it work out? A pause. The silver eyes looked at her from 2 inches away. I am here, she said. Fletcher Avenue looked the same as it always did. Auto repair. Nel salon. The Quick Mart with a synthetic pine smell. A city that had made peace with its limitations. Issa was showing her something. Not pointing exactly. She had no fingers to point with, though her understanding of gestures seemed flexible enough that she managed without them. But orienting. Her head moved in a direction, and Mara's attention followed it. And when she looked, she could see it the way you see something once your eyes adjust in a dim room, the thing that had been there all along, but that you had not been calibrated to receive. The city was full of edges. Not physical edges. Not corners or curbs or the geometric edges of buildings. These were, she struggled for the word and landed on seams. The places where the fabric of a space was thinner. The air above the intersection at Fletcher and Vine shimmered very slightly at a frequency she had not had the equipment to detect until approximately 14 hours ago. The wall of the auto repair shop had a patch of shadow on it that was not in the right relationship to the light source. The alley between the nail salon and the dry cleaner 2 doors down had a quality of depth that was wrong for its actual measurements. I walk past these every day, Mara said. Yes. There are more of them than there used to be. Yes. She was not guessing. She did not know how she knew this, did not know how she was seeing any of it, but she knew it as plainly as she knew the difference between $4.19 turkey and $3.79 tuna. There was a knowledge in her body that had not been there yesterday, and it was Vale's doing the thing that had happened during the 3 a.m. conversation that she had noticed as a pressure behind her left ear and decided to examine later. Later was apparently now. Your father did something, she said. He gave you part of the site, Issa said. The part that can be given. The rest you will have to build. He could have asked. He should have. A pause. I told him to ask. He said humans take longer to agree to things when they are asked than when they are simply shown. Mara considered this. It was not wrong. It was also, she thought, the reasoning of something that had been in charge long enough that the habit of asking had gotten rusty. She filed this too. Things to discuss with Vale when she had the chance. What am I building toward, she said. Issa's answer took longer than the others. They were standing at the corner of Fletcher and Vine by this point, under the traffic light that only let 4 cars through at a time, and the shimmer in the air above the intersection was doing something. She could see it clearly now, a slow tightening, the way a knot tightens under tension, and she could feel it corresponding to something in the translation that lived behind her left ear, a kind of low-frequency recognition. The threshold keeper cannot hold much longer, Issa said, and we cannot fight the hollow. Not directly. It is too far along. But if someone could reach the keeper, reach it, and give it something to hold to, something that is not the old agreements, because those are breaking, it might hold the 4th one long enough. Long enough for what? For the coalition to arrive. Mara looked at the shimmer. How long is long enough? We calculate your time differently. Approximately 6 of your weeks. 6 weeks. Yes. And reaching the threshold keeper means passage, Issa said. Yes. Mara looked at the city that had made peace with its limitations a long time ago. The city of auto repair shops and nail salons and a quick mart that smelled like burnt coffee and synthetic pine and a concrete ledge behind the dumpster that was exactly the right height for sitting and eating a sandwich alone at noon on a Thursday. She thought about the 40 cents. She thought about the wing. She thought about the 47 questions before coffee. She thought about the 8th question, which had been, why do your buildings not move? And which she had not thought about again until this moment, standing under a traffic light, watching the air above an intersection tighten, and she understood now that it had not been small talk. Issa had been asking her something real. Why do you live in something that cannot choose? Why do you stay inside something fixed? When do we go? Mara said. When you are ready. Give me a window. Issa looked at her, really looked the collapsed star look, the first one, the look from behind the recycling bin. 3 days, she said. After 3 days, the seams will be too unstable for safe passage, and we will have to wait for a window that may not come. 3 days. She had a dentist appointment on Thursday that she had been rescheduling for 4 months. She had an invoice backlog that Tim was definitely going to complain about. She had an apple in her refrigerator that would absolutely need to be thrown out. Okay, she said. She pulled out her phone. She called her supervisor, a woman named Patricia who had the administrative efficiency of someone who had been doing the same job for 20 years and had made a very deliberate peace with it. And she left a voicemail saying she had a family emergency and would need a leave of absence, and she was sorry for the short notice. She said the same thing to Tim via text because Tim was a texter. She put her phone away. 3 days is enough time to learn what I need to learn, she said. It was not a question. No, Issa said honestly. But it is the time you have. They went back to the apartment. Issa ate the apple that was 2 days from being thrown out, and then looked at Mara with the expression that had become recognizable as the 48th question face, the one that meant there was something being held. Ask, Mara said. On your world, Issa said. When you help something, is it always because you think it will help you also? The directness of it was not cruelty. It was youth. 240 years of watching people from behind recycling bins had given Issa a very specific and very practical view of motivation. No, Mara said. The others. Other people are different people, Mara said. I can't explain them. I can only explain me. Then, explain you. She thought about it for a real moment. Not the reflexive answer, not the socially acceptable one. I saw something that was hurting, she said. I had something that could help. Those two things being true at the same time felt like enough of a reason. Issa looked at her for a long time. This is very strange, she said. I know. In a good way, Issa clarified, as if this were important, as if the clarification were something she wanted clearly on record. I know, Mara said again. They spent 3 days in the apartment, and what those 3 days contained was this: a great deal of information delivered in no particular order by a being whose understanding of pedagogical sequence had been shaped by 240 years of chaotic experience, a significant amount of food because Issa ate with the appetite of something operating at a scale that did not quite fit the planet it was currently on, several conversations that started as questions and became something. More like a working understanding of two very different kinds of minds trying to find the shared language between them. And one night, the second night around 2 a.m., when Issa made the low, resonant sound again, the chord purr, and Mara understood without asking that it was something like contentment. And she did not say anything about it. She just let it exist. On the morning of the third day, Vale's voice arrived. Not Vale, just a voice through a thing that Issa produced from somewhere in the collar she wore, a piece of something that functioned like a speaker, but was made of material Mara had no name for. It played sound the way old rooms play the echoes of things said in them, sound with weight and depth and the quality of having traveled. "It is time," Vale said. His voice in the apartment was smaller than it had been in person, but the bass register of it still made Mara's teeth do the thing. Issa looked at Mara. Mara had a bag. She had packed it the night before with the specific efficiency of someone who had packed in a hurry before and knew now how to do it with intention rather than panic. Clothes. First aid kit. 2 protein bars. The electric bill with 6 pages of notes. A pen. The good mustard. She had stopped at the grocery store on day 2 and bought 3 jars. She did not care if this was irrational. The mustard was coming. "Ready," she said. Issa made the sound that was not a word, but that Mara had learned over 3 days meant something like, "Then let's go." The air in the center of the apartment began to open. Not tearing this time. More like unfolding. The way origami unfolds in reverse, a controlled and intentional expansion, and the cold white light came through at the edges, but the center was not too bright this time. It was the between color, the ocean depth color, the something larger than the frame color. She could see through it. She could see a sky. Not a human sky. Not the washed-out blue of a Thursday morning above Fletcher Avenue. Something bigger and darker and full of colors that were not in the human visible spectrum, but that her new left-ear knowledge translated into sensation. A feeling like before a storm, and also like morning, and also like something she had no word for, but that sat in her chest like the moment just before a very important decision. Issa stepped through. Mara picked up her bag. She looked around the apartment. The cheap laminate floor. The couch. The water stain. The scale, still hanging in the air where the portal had been, catching the light, and cycling through smoke gray, violet gold. She left the television off. She stepped through. The door of the apartment, which she had not locked, she had forgotten about entirely, and she would spend approximately 4 seconds over the next 6 weeks thinking about this, and then let it go, close slowly behind her in the draft from the portal's closing, as if the building were trying to be tidy about it, as if the city that had made peace with its limitations was doing one last small polite thing. Then, it was just an apartment, with a scale floating in the living room, and the whole shape of the universe on the other side of where the door had closed. The first thing she noticed was the gravity. Not that it was wrong. It was not dramatically wrong. Not so wrong that she stumbled or fell or had to consciously adjust the weight of her own body against it. It was off by a percentage she could feel without being able to name. The way a room is slightly too warm or slightly too cold, and you know it before you could explain it, a number your body is running in the background that surfaces as a vague sense of wrongness without locating itself in any specific experience. She was 7 to 8% lighter than she was on Earth. She would discover later that this percentage was accurate. She would spend a lot of time over the next days discovering that her body was running math she had not consciously assigned to it, that the thing Vale had installed behind her left ear was not only a translation engine, but a calibration instrument, and that the calibration included spatial, gravitational, atmospheric, and temporal data that was feeding into her nervous system as sensation rather than information. She was not told the temperature. She felt it. She was not told the gravity. She waited. This was useful and also deeply disorienting, like learning that you've been reading subtitles on a film your entire life, and someone has just turned them on. The sky was enormous. She had expected this intellectually, had understood from the depth of the portal view that she was going somewhere with more sky than the slice of it visible from Fletcher Avenue. She had not expected it to be this kind of enormous, the kind that does not just expand your sense of scale upward, but outward in every direction, the kind that suggests the ground under your feet is a very thin layer between you and the endless. The sky above this place was deep and dark despite what felt like daytime, the way high-altitude skies are dark even at noon, and It was full of colors, 3 suns, she realized, with the left ear knowledge translating color out of ultraviolet into sensation, 3 different size light sources at different points in the sky, and the light from each one was a different temperature, and they overlapped in combinations that the human eye was not built to parse, but that her body was receiving. Anyway, as a sensation like standing in 3 different weathers simultaneously. She was standing in a place that, the word came with the left ear translation, was called something that translated approximately to the exchange. A neutral ground, a place where the coalition met, where things that operated at a scale larger than planetary gathered to conduct the business of the larger war. The surface beneath her feet was not ground in the earth sense. It was more compressed than rock, denser, and faintly luminescent in a way that was probably not remarkable here, and that she was working to treat as unremarkable. Issa was beside her, full size, both wings even. She was not making herself small, and the difference in her was the difference between a compressed spring and an open hand. There were others here. She had expected others in the abstract. She had not. She found, standing here, that abstract expectations about scale are completely useless when confronted with the actual thing. There were beings here that she could not look at directly, not because they were dangerous, but because her eyes could not find a stable way to process them. Things that existed at a frequency her visual system touched and slid off of. Things that were present as sensation rather than image, warmth, pressure, sudden knowledge of directions that had no names in English. Things that were visible, but that her mind declined to resolve into shapes, filing them instead as impressions. Very large, very old, very much aware that she was there. They were looking at her. She understood the smallest thing in this room by several orders of magnitude, in every metric she could think of. She squared her shoulders. She had been the smallest thing in rooms before. She was good at that. She had learned, in a city she did not talk about, in an apartment she had left at night with 2 bags, that size in a room is not the thing that determines how much space you're allowed to take up. You have to take it. You have to choose it. Nobody gives you room. You make it the way you make it, and then you stand in what you made, and you do not shrink. She did not shrink. This is her, Issa said, to the room, to everything in the room, in a language that translated behind Mara's left ear into something she could process, though the original was, she knew, not anything a human mouth had ever made. The one who found me, the one who is coming to the threshold keeper. The room held a quality of attention that was not sound, but that felt like sound, like something very large focusing. A voice came, not from any one source, from the direction of a presence in the far-right area of the space, a presence she was receiving as warmth and as the sense of altitude, the feeling of looking down from a great height without moving. Translate for the small one, the voice said, which was not condescending. It was simply practical, the same tone she used when she told Tim to use the new invoice software instead of the old one, because that was what the moment required. The left ear translation came in full of beat after the sound. Why you? The presence said. Not challenge. Inquiry. Genuine inquiry, the kind that wants the actual answer. Mara thought about this. She had answered it once already, in her kitchen on the second morning, to Issa. She had an answer. She was not sure the answer would translate. She gave it anyway. I had something that could help, she said. The situation required it. I don't have a more complicated reason than that. The warmth in the room shifted. Not disapproval. Something more interesting than approval. Something that was closer to assessment. She is measuring you, Issa murmured. Who is she? The oldest one here. She does not have a name that translates. What does she want to know? Whether you are useful, Issa said, and whether you are honest. I scored okay on both of those. Issa made the sound. The chord purr. She has not decided yet. Mara turned to face the warmth presence directly. She felt this was important. She had learned that when being assessed, it was better to let yourself be seen than to manage what was seen, because managers of perception were readable as managers, and what got through was the management, not the person, and the assessment landed on the management and found a hollow. I'm a human from Earth, she said. I'm an accounts receivable coordinator, which means I spend my days chasing money that people owe other people. I have a first aid kit in my bag, and 3 jars of mustard and 6 pages of notes on the back of an electric bill. I don't know your language without the translation in my head. I don't know this place or its history. I'm the least qualified person here by any measure I can see. She paused. I'm also the one who is going to the threshold keeper, she said. Because I said yes, and I don't unsay things. So if there's something useful I should know before I leave, I would appreciate it being said while we're still in the same place. The warmth in the room changed. It was not warmth anymore exactly. It was something older than warmth. Something that warmth was a small translation of. The oldest presence spoke again. She will do, it said simply. Mara exhaled. She had not known she was holding her breath. What followed was an hour, approximately, of the most dense practical instruction she had ever received, delivered through the left ear translation in rapid succession by three different beings who communicated in ways that ranged from speech to what she could only describe as direct knowledge. Information arriving in her mind fully formed the way a word arrives when you've been trying to remember it, suddenly, there without the process of retrieval being visible. The threshold keeper was not a being in the way she had imagined. It was not a dragon, not anything with a form she could picture. It was, the word that came through translation was anchor, which was not exactly right, but was the closest available concept. It was an intelligence woven into a specific point in the structure of the universe, the way a knot is woven into a rope. It held the fourth agreement not by being strong, but by being there, by existing at that point, by being the entity in relation to which the agreement had meaning. You cannot hold an agreement with nothing. The keeper was the something. It was failing because the hollow was pulling at what kept it present. Not attacking, pulling, unraveling. The hollow had understood a very long time ago that presence is not defended by fighting but by holding, and that what you have to destroy to end a presence is not the presence itself, but the thing that makes presence possible. It was pulling the keeper's attention away from itself, pulling its sense of its own location, pulling the anchoring, and the only thing that could counter that was more anchoring, something the keeper could hold to, something real and present and not part of the system the hollow was unraveling, something from outside the agreement structure, which the hollow had mapped and was methodically deconstructing, something the hollow could not anticipate because it did not exist within any framework the hollow had accounted for. A human, from a quiet world, who had never been in any of this before, and was therefore not in any of the hollow's maps. Oh, Mara said when this landed. I'm not a weapon. No, said the voice of the oldest presence. I'm a variable they haven't calculated for. Yes. She sat with this for a moment. She had spent 8 months in accounts receivable, which meant she had spent 8 months finding the discrepancies. The numbers that did not match the expected pattern. The line items that did not fit the framework. The values that were technically present, but had not been accounted for in the original calculation. She was, in the most literal sense, a discrepancy. She almost laughed. She did not, because the room did not have the texture for laughter yet, and she was practical about timing. But she filed it, and the filing of it settled something. Issa appeared at her shoulder. We should move. The keeper's location is not fixed. It shifts with its attention, and its attention is being pulled. If we wait too long, the passage window narrows. How do I give it something to hold to? Mara said. Practically. What does that mean? It holds to what it knows, Issa said. What it knows is presence. You must be more present than the hollow is pulling. You must be undeniable in the specific place where it is. How? Issa turned to look at her. The silver eyes, the collapsed star quality. You were undeniable to me, she said, behind a building, in a city that did not know what you were doing with half a sandwich. I do not think presence is something you need to learn. Mara picked up her bag. Let's go, she said. The passage to the threshold keeper's location was not a portal this time. Issa described it as a method of movement that did not involve traveling through space so much as traveling to a different relationship with it, which was not a sentence that resolved itself into anything Mara could visualize. The practical experience was this. Issa pressed her nose to the center of Mara's forehead very briefly and very gently, and the exchange fell away not like disappearing, but like the way a word drops away when you have found what it was pointing to. They arrived. There is no better word. They were not there, and then they were. The threshold keeper's location was not a place in any sense she had a framework for. It was not dark or bright, or large or small. It was present. That was the only word. It was presence without container, without dimension, without any of the qualities she used to identify space. It was simply the experience of being somewhere that was specifically, completely, intentionally here. And it was losing ground. She could feel it. This was not metaphor. The anchoring, the presence that made this a somewhere, was thinning in a direction she could not point at, but could feel, the way you feel a draft from a gap you cannot see, the cold knowledge of absence coming from a specific vector. It was being pulled. The hollow's work was quiet and methodical and had the terrible patience of something that had been doing this for a very long time. There was something at the center of this presence. She could not see it the way she saw Issa or the apartment or the Kmart. She could perceive it the way she perceived the warmth presence at the exchange, as sensation, as knowledge arriving without image. It was old. It was tired. It was holding on with the specific quality of something that has been holding on for so long it has forgotten what it is holding on to and is now holding on to the holding. Mara knew this feeling. She had held on like that. In a city she did not talk about. She had held on past the point of knowing what for, past the point of it making sense, until the holding itself was the only reflex left. And then someone, not a dragon, not a being older than the solar system, but a woman in a waiting room who had sat beside her and said nothing for 20 minutes and then said, "You're still here," matter-of-factly, like it was simply and importantly true, had given her something to hold to that was not the holding. She sat down. She did not know if sitting down meant anything in a space that did not have floor in the conventional sense. She sat down anyway, in the way you sit down when you're done performing and you're just going to be what you are now, and she put her bag beside her. She opened the bag. She took out the first jar of mustard. She set it in front of her. It sat there, solid and yellow-labeled in the somewhere without dimension. "I know you're tired," she said. She said it the way you say something true, not loudly, not carefully, just the way a thing comes out when it is accurate and does not need decoration. "I know you've been holding on past the point of knowing why. I know the thing that's pulling at you is very good at what it does, and I know it's been at this longer than I've been alive, and I know there's no good reason for it to get less good at it." She paused. "But I am here," she said. "Not because I'm most qualified. Not because I understand everything that's happening. I'm here because I said yes to a question that needed answering and because I don't unsay things. That's it. That's my entire argument." The presence that was the threshold keeper did not respond in any way she could point to. She kept going. 6 weeks, she said. "That's what I'm asking for. You hold on for 6 weeks, and the coalition arrives, and the hollow has to deal with something that actually knows how to fight it. 6 weeks is not nothing. 6 weeks is enough time for a lot of things to change." She thought about the 40 cents. She thought about the sandwich. She thought about the wing at the wrong angle, and the silence that had held in that alley behind the Quick Mart when she sat on the concrete ledge and did not make sudden movements and just existed in the same space as something that was afraid. "The whole universe is watching," she said. "I know. I could feel it at the exchange. But I'm going to ask you to not think about the universe right now. I'm going to ask you to think about 6 weeks from now, which is not very far, and about the fact that something small and tired and lost ended up in the right place because it took a shortcut, and a completely unremarkable person with a turkey sandwich happened to be there when it did." The hollow's pull was still happening. She could feel it. The thinning continued in the direction she could not point at. But there was something else now, a quality in the presence around her that had not been there when she arrived, the difference between stone and almost stone which she recognized. She took out the second jar of mustard. She set it beside the first. "I'm not leaving," she said simply. "I know that's not a strategy, but it's true, and true things are hard to unravel. You can't hollow out what's genuinely here." Something in the threshold keeper's presence shifted. It was not dramatic. It was not a sudden strengthening, not a reversal, nothing cinematic. It was the smallest possible version of turning, the fraction of a degree that constitutes the beginning of a choice, the way a person who has been staring at a wall for a long time turns their eyes by the width of a word and sees something they had not seen before. It turned toward her, not physically, but it was there, the attention, the acknowledgement, the turning. She felt it land. She felt it the way she had felt the joint of Issa's wing go back into place, that sound in her back teeth, that sensation of something completing a sentence it had started. The hollow's pull did not stop, but something had changed in the relationship between the pull and the presence, and what had changed was that the presence had something to hold in now that was not the holding. She sat in the somewhere without dimension with her 2 jars of mustard and her bag and her 6 pages of notes, and she was more present than she had ever been in her apartment on Fletcher Avenue, more present than she had been in accounts receivable, more present than she had been in a long time, and she understood that this was what had been asked of her, and that she was, in fact, doing it. She was here. She was undeniably here. And it was enough. For now. Issa's voice came from behind her. The dragon had been somewhere at the edges of this, present but not interfering, and Mara had been aware of her the way you are aware of someone waiting for you who trusts you to do the thing you said you would do. It's holding, Issa said. The word came out like something she had been afraid to say before this moment. For now, Mara said. For now is enough. Mara looked at the 2 jars of mustard sitting in a space that had no floor. I'm keeping those, she said. Of course, said Issa. She picked them up. She put them back in a bag. She stood in the way you stand when you have done the thing, and you are ready for whatever the next thing is, and she turned to Issa with the question she had been building since the exchange. What does the hollow want, she said. Now what does it do? What does it want? Issa looked at her for a long moment. We are not sure, she said, that those are different questions. Mara picked up her bag. I think they are, she said. That was the thought she carried out of the keeper's presence, and back into whatever came next. The thought that the hollow, whatever it had become, had been something else once, and that the something else mattered, and that maybe the approach to a thing that chose emptiness was not the same as the approach to a thing that was born empty. It was a thought she did not have evidence for. It was also the kind of thought that did not wait for evidence. She filed it next to the starred line on her notes. Things that choose emptiness become the names for what they chose. She added, what did it choose before it chose this? She put the pen away. The somewhere without dimension fell away, and the exchange came back, and the enormous sky with its 3 suns pressed down from above, and Issa walked beside her with both wings even, and the coalition's attention was on them from every direction like a hand held just above something very fragile, waiting to catch it if it fell. They had 4 weeks and 6 days left. The threshold keeper was holding. Mara Voss squared her shoulders in the light of 3 suns and thought about the hollow, and what a person becomes when they stop being who they were, and whether the distance between those 2 states was as permanent as it looked from the outside. She had 6 pages of notes. She was going to need more paper. She found the answer by accident, the way most answers arrive, not at the end of a deliberate search, but sideways in a conversation that was about something else in the 4th week of the 6, when the threshold keeper was still holding, and the coalition was still 2 weeks out, and the hollow was changing its method. It had noticed her. She had expected this eventually. A discrepancy in a calculation, once the calculation has been reviewed, stops being a discrepancy and becomes a known variable, and a known variable can be addressed. She had understood that her window of usefulness as an uncalculated factor was finite. She had not known what the hollow would do when it accounted for her. What it did was stop pulling. This was not good news. Issa explained it to her on the 2nd morning of the 4th week, in the room they had been given in the exchange, a room that translated into sensation as very high up and very still, walls that were not walls exactly, but were definitely boundaries, a space that suited Mara better than she would have predicted for somewhere with no furniture she recognized. She had been sleeping on her folded jacket on a surface that was the right temperature and the right density and did not need to be a mattress because it was doing the same job. When the hollow stops pulling, Issa said, it means it has found a different method. What's the different method? We do not know yet. That's not comforting. No, Issa agreed. She was eating something that the left-ear translation called sustenance, and that looked like nothing Mara had a word for, and that Issa had offered her twice, and that Mara had politely declined twice because she had a protein bar and the mustard, and she was rationing her willingness to adapt. The hollow's change in method was felt before it was understood. The keeper's presence, which had stabilized in the days after Mara's first visit. She had gone back twice, sitting in the somewhere without dimension with her mustard jars and her notes and her blunt, persistent presence, and each time the anchoring had been a little more solid, the difference between someone learning to lean on something and someone who has learned. The keeper's presence began on the 4th day of the 4th week to develop a quality she had not felt before. It was confused. She had not known a being of that age, and nature could be confused. But confusion has a texture, and She knew it by touch, having done accounts receivable for long enough that she could identify a confused invoice at 30 feet, and what she was feeling in the keeper's presence was the same quality scaled up by several impossible orders of magnitude. It was receiving something from a hollow, not pulling, something else. Information, she would conclude later. Information delivered in the specific way that information can be weaponized, which is by being incomplete in a way that generates doubt rather than knowledge, by giving enough truth that the doubt has somewhere to root itself. The hollow was telling the keeper something. She could not hear it. She could not access what was being said. But she could feel its effect on the present she had spent 4 weeks anchoring, the way you feel a conversation through a wall. Not the words, but the shape of their impact. She sat in the keeper's presence on the 5th day of the 4th week, and she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Whatever it's telling you, you don't have to decide if it's true right now." The keeper's attention, which had learned to orient toward her the way a plant orients toward a consistent light source, turned. "You can hold both things at the same time," she said. "The thing it's saying and the uncertainty about whether the thing it's saying is true. You don't have to collapse it into a decision. Not right now. Not with 9 days left." The quality of confusion in the presence did not disappear. But it changed. The difference between a storm that is approaching and a storm that has stalled, which is still weather but is not movement. She went back to the exchange. She found the oldest presence. She had learned, over 4 weeks, to locate it by the altitude sensation, the feeling of height. And she asked the question that had been building since the exchange, since she had added the starred line to her notes, since the moment in the keeper's presence when she had understood that the hollow's approach was information rather than force. What was it before, she said? She did not specify the it. She did not need to. The oldest presence was quiet for a time that was not long by her standards and was probably very short by its own. Then, it said, through the translation that arrived, fully formed. It was a keeper. Mara stood very still, like the threshold keeper. Yes, there were many once. They held different agreements in different places. This one held an agreement about voice, about the right of things to be heard. It was very old, very dedicated. The agreement it held was broken, not by pulling, but by something that called itself truth. Something that arrived with a very complete and very well-constructed case that the things the keeper was giving voice to had no right to exist. The argument was good enough that it could not be immediately refuted. The keeper began to doubt. The doubt became the question of whether the agreement had any basis. The question became the answer, and the answer became the hollow. Mara's pen was moving without her consciously deciding to use it. She was on the back of the electric bill. She had filled 11 pages since she arrived here, and she had started writing on her protein bar wrapper. It lost itself to a good argument, she said. Yes, and now it makes the same argument to everything it encounters. Yes. She put the pen down. Because if the argument works on others, she said slowly, then the argument is validated. The doubt that broke it is proved to have been correct. And if the doubt was correct, then it did not lose itself, the oldest presence said. Then it was always what it is now. And everything it was before was the error. Mara sat with this for a long time. The hollow was not, had never been, looking for territory or hierarchy. It was looking for proof. Every world it reached, every agreement it broke, every keeper it unraveled. These were not conquests. They were experiments. It was running the same experiment over and over again on a cosmic scale, trying to prove to itself that the doubt was right, that the agreement was wrong, that the voice it had silenced all those years ago when it chose emptiness over uncertainty had not been worth keeping. It was, she thought, the saddest thing she had ever heard. She also understood immediately and completely why this was not an argument she could make to the coalition. The coalition was fighting a war. You could not fight a war by being sad about the enemy. You could not ask beings who have been losing ground for eons to pause and feel sorry for the thing that was taking it. But you could. You, specifically. You, who were a discrepancy, who were not in the calculation, who had arrived in this war completely sideways through the mechanism of a gas station sandwich, and were therefore not bound by the frameworks everyone else was operating inside. You could do the thing that none of the frameworks permitted. You could go talk to it. This was a thought that, when she presented it to Issa, produced the longest silence she had ever received from the young dragon. No, Issa said. Walk me through why. Because it will what? Make an argument? Give me incomplete information to generate doubt? I'm an accounts receivable coordinator, Issa. I chase discrepancies for a living. I read incomplete information for breakfast. I've spent 8 months finding the number that doesn't belong in the column, and I am very, very good at knowing when a case has a hole in it. Issa looked at her. Also, Mara said, you said my presence was undeniable. You said that. I didn't say it about myself. You said it. I said it about the sandwich. Same thing. It is absolutely not the same. Issa. The young dragon went quiet. I'm not going to fight it, Mara said. I'm not going to try to defeat it or resolve it or fix it in one conversation. I don't have the tools for that. But I can do the thing I actually know how to do, which is sit with something that is hurting and hold very still and not make sudden movements and be undeniably present until something shifts. She paused. And I can ask it one question, she said. What question? When the argument arrived, Mara said, the one that broke it. Did it ever get to answer back? Issa was very still. I don't know, she said quietly. I think it didn't, Mara said. I think the argument arrived, and it doubted, and the doubt became the answer, and it never got to say, but wait. I think nobody let it say, but wait. And I think I might be entirely wrong, and I'm aware that I am a human from a gas station city proposing this about it being older than my solar system, but I think that it has been running this experiment for this long because it is still waiting for someone to let it answer back. Issa looked at her for a very long time. If it destroys you, she said, my father will blame himself. Tell him not to, Mara said. I'm choosing this. The access point to the hollow was not through a portal. It was through the threshold keeper, which held the point where the hollow was working, which meant she had to go back to the keeper first and ask through the translation, through the connection she had built over 4 weeks of sitting in the somewhere without dimension with mustard and blunt persistence, for the keeper to let her through to the other side of the pole. The keeper's response, when it came, was not words. It was the sensation of the door opening. She went through. What was on the other side was not the hollow she had imagined. She had imagined something that matched the war, something aggressive, something that announced itself, something that filled space the way destruction fills space, expansive and loud. This was quiet. Quiet in the way that very old grief is quiet, the kind that has been held so long it has become the background, the ambient condition, the thing you do not notice anymore because you have organized your entire existence around it, and it is no longer loud enough to hear over the organization. It was enormous, obviously, scale beyond her comprehension, but the quality of it was not what she had expected, and the unexpectedness steadied her because she had been preparing for the wrong thing, and not the wrong thing was perversely easier. She sat down. In the nowhere that was the hollow's presence, she sat down the way she sat down in the somewhere of the keeper's presence, the dumb-performing way, the just-going-to-what-em way. She put the last jar of mustard in front of her. She waited. The hollow's attention arrived the way a weather change arrives, not from a direction, just a change in condition, a shift in what the air was doing. She felt the argument begin to form. The incomplete information. The weight of it, the quality of it, it was good, she had to admit. It was a very well-constructed doubt, built from things that were true enough to carry weight and framed in ways that left the crucial gaps in the dark. She felt it arrive in her mind, and she felt the part of her that was exhausted and alone and had eaten a gas station sandwich in an alley respond to it the way a tired person responds to a compelling lie, which is with the specific relief of something that offers to simplify the weight. She let it be there. She did not fight it. She did not argue. She did not perform certainty to counter the doubt, which would have been its own kind of untruth. She said, "You had an answer." The hollow's attention shifted. When the argument arrived, "You had an answer. You have been waiting to say it." The weather change quality of the attention became something else. She could not name it. She held very still. "I can't undo it," she said. "Whatever it did, whatever you became, I can't fix that. I don't have the tools, and I won't pretend I do. But I can hear the answer, if you want to say it." This was the stillest she had ever been. This was stiller than the alley. This was stiller than the keeper's presence. This was the stillness of having put down everything she was carrying and being only what she was, which was a person from Fletcher Avenue who had learned, in a city she did not talk about, that the most powerful thing you could offer something in pain was the uncomplicated fact of your attention. The hollow did not speak, but something in it moved. The pull on the threshold keeper. She could feel it distantly, the way she felt the keeper's presence through the connection they had built. Changed. Not stopped. Changed. The specific quality of the pulling shifted, the methodical, patient quality of it, and what replaced it was something she could only describe as pause. The pause lasted a very long time, and then the hollow's attention moved toward her in a way that was different from the argument, different from the experiment, different from anything it had been doing for longer than her species had been standing upright, and she received what came through it not as information or as sensation, but as something in between, something that arrived behind her left ear the way the translation arrived, but that was not the translation. That was older and rawer and had been held so long it had forgotten it had ever wanted to be said. She could not put it into human words exactly. She tried later for pages and pages and always came back to the same approximation. The voice that had been silenced had been saying, I am here. The agreement I hold is real. The things I give voice to are real, and real things cannot be unmade by a good argument. Real things are real regardless of whether they are permitted to exist. And it had been right. The argument that had broken it had been wrong. Not partially wrong. Wrong in the specific way that a calculation is wrong when a single digit is off at the start and every number after it is precisely, carefully, catastrophically built on that one error. It had been right, and it had not gotten to say so, and the not saying had become the doubt, and the doubt had become the hollow, and the hollow had spent every moment since trying to prove, by breaking every agreement it found, that the voice that had been silenced had been worth silencing. And it had never proved it, because you cannot prove something by breaking it, because real things are real regardless of whether they are permitted to exist. The pause held. Mara sat in it. She did not say, so stop. She did not say, come back. She did not say anything because those would have been the wrong things, and she knew by now that the wrong thing said at the exact right moment was still the wrong thing. She said, very quietly, I know. 2 words. She had given a sandwich. She had set a wing right. She had gone back 6 times to a somewhere without dimension with a jar of mustard, and stayed until the anchor held. She had crossed space she had no business crossing to talk to something so old it had forgotten what talking was for. 2 words was enough. The coalition arrived on the 39th day of 6 weeks, which was 3 days early, because the threshold keeper had been holding so strongly that the passage opened ahead of schedule, the way a healing accelerates when the body stops fighting itself and redirects the energy. The war continued. It was not over. The hollow's unraveling of 3 agreements was not undone by 1 conversation, and the beings that had been waiting at the edges of Earth's broken protections did not retreat at the news that the 4th one had held. The work of the coalition was long, and it was hard, and Mara had no place in most of it, which she had always understood. But the threshold keeper held. And 3 weeks after the coalition's arrival, in a communication that came through the device Issa wore on her collar, the sound with weight device, a message arrived from Hollow. Not words. The Hollow did not speak in words, or not yet. It was a frequency, a tone, something that the oldest presence in the exchange received and translated and then was quiet about for a very long time. When it finally spoke, it said, it is withdrawing from the 4th agreement. Mara was sitting in the exchange, back against the luminescent knot rock surface, eating the last of her protein bars. She looked up. Permanently, she said. For now, the oldest presence said. She almost smiled. For now is enough. She went home on the 43rd day. Issa took her, the same way she had brought her, the nose to the forehead, the somewhere becoming the apartment on Fletcher Avenue, the portal unfolding in reverse, and depositing her on the floor of her living room with her bag, and her empty mustard jars, and 11 pages of notes, and her folded jacket, and the physical sense of her gravity being 4% too high after 43 days of being lighter than usual. The television was still off. The scale was still floating in the living room, cycling through smoke gray and violet and gold. The pasta bowl was on the coffee table with a fork in it. She had been gone 43 days. She was very glad she had emptied the refrigerator before she left. She set her bag down. She sat on the couch. She looked at the scale. She thought about Issa, who was still out there, both wings even, asking 48 questions in the time it takes someone else to drink a cup of coffee. She thought about Veil and the three gifts: protection, knowledge, passage, and the fact that the debt was settled now, technically, and that she was free to refuse anything further. She picked up her phone. She had 61 missed calls and one text from Tim about the copier. She sent Tim a thumbs-up emoji. She called Patricia and left a voicemail saying she was back and would be in Monday. She looked at the scale. She thought about the hollow, in the pause that had not been resolution, but had been a beginning of one. The voice that had finally said what it had been holding. The thing that chooses emptiness is not the same as the thing that was born empty. What chooses can choose again. What chooses can change. Not quickly, not easily, maybe not at all, but the door is different from the wall. She wrote that down. Last line of the 11 pages. She put the pen away. She went to the grocery store. She bought eggs and bread and fruit and 3 jars of spicy brown mustard because she had learned something about herself in the last 43 days, and what she had learned was that she was the kind of person who should always have more than she thinks she needs, because she was apparently the kind of person who gives it away and keeps choosing to, and that was not going to change. She came home. She made scrambled eggs. The scale turned gold in the light and held it. Outside on Fletcher Avenue, the city continued being what it was: the auto repair shops, the nail salon, the Quick Mart with its synthetic pine smell, the street light that flickered, the traffic light that let 4 cars through at a time. A city that had made peace with its limitations a long time ago, unaware that in a 700-square-foot apartment above it, a woman who had once stood at a refrigerator debating 40 cents was eating scrambled eggs and thinking about the voice that had finally been let to answer back, about the pause in an ancient, terrible pulling, about 9 weeks of being a discrepancy in someone else's calculation, about what happens next. She did not know what happened next. She knew that the 4th agreement was holding. She knew that Issa had both wings. She knew that real things were real regardless of whether they were permitted to exist. She picked up her pen one more time. She wrote, at the bottom of the last page, underneath all the notes, underneath the starred line, and the question she had added, and the last line she had just added, she gave her lunch to a stray dragon. She looked at it for a long time. She drew a small box around it. The way she boxed the important things in invoices, the number that was the whole point of the column, the value that everything else was in service of. Then she closed a notebook. She had bought an actual notebook at the grocery store, finally, and she finished her eggs. The scale drifted. Gold and violet and smoke, and then gold again, holding the color longer than usual, as if it had decided. Fletcher Avenue at 9 in the evening. The city, the apartment, the couch. Mara Voss, 26 years old, accounts receivable coordinator, technically the least qualified person in any room she had been in for the last 6 weeks, and almost certainly the least qualified person who would ever sit in those rooms. She was full of scrambled eggs and notes and the specific quiet of someone who has done the thing and come back from it and is now sitting inside the ordinary and finding it for the first time in a long time, not too small. The phone buzzed. A number she did not recognize. International code that did not resolve to any country she knew. She answered. "This is Mara," she said. A pause. Then Issa's voice, young and direct and carrying 48 questions inside it, said, "There is a second thing." Mara looked at the scale. "Of course there is," she said. She picked up her pen. She opened the notebook. She wrote, "Second thing." And she listened.